So Andrew's joining us now, speaking about his perspective from a great deal of experience at the University of Sussex and elsewhere. Andrew, thank you very much for joining us today.
Okay, firstly, I'd like to thank the UK Research Integrity Office for inviting me to present at today's webinar to share the experiences at the University of Sussex and their ethical review of non-ASPA, non-regulated work in both teaching and research at the university. For today's presentation, I'd like to start by giving you some information about my career and experience to date. I'll then want to move on to the background of the development of the ethics review within the university, and then describe the two-stage process that we have in place with a couple of examples of submissions that have been reviewed in the last couple of years. I'll also want to give you an overview of a specific submission where I felt the university were very successful in improving animal welfare of chicks and finches on an observational study in Australia. And finally, some information on the status of the university plans to, on the university's plans to bring the use of animal-derived products and materials into the ethics review, and finally, future work on the refinements, etc., of our processes within the university. So a little bit about me. I've worked in the industry for around 40 years, of which I've held management roles for approximately 35 years. I've been lucky enough to work, or to have the opportunity to work in all sectors of the industry and with all common laboratory animals and some wildlife species. I was an active member of the IT Council for many years, and I've been the Vice Chair, the Membership Secretary and the Treasurer. I'm passionate about the development of staff and promoting the work of animal technologists. And I would just pick up on Nikki's point about animal technicians are a great resource and somewhat undervalued. So I think where you're working with the animal facility, it's important to tap into that resource. And over recent years, I've been more active with respect to the ethical and welfare aspects of the roles I've been performing. I joined the University of Sussex in March 2018 and hold the NACWO, HOLC, NIO roles, and I'm chair of the Animal Review Group, which I'll come on to as part of the presentation. I'm a member of the South East AWERB Hub, and previously, when I was at FERA, I was in the northern equivalent, the North East Hub. When I joined the university, it was already an aspiration that the university would review all non-ASPA submissions and the use of animal-derived materials in teaching and research, internally and externally. But to move this forwards, it was important that this was effectively communicated through to the heads of school and to get their support and buy-in. Initially, as you may imagine, there was some concern regarding the potential increase in bureaucracy and potential delays to projects, particularly with one of our larger groups, the Evolution, Behaviour and Environmental Department, where there are a number of projects, student projects, ongoing each year. And there was also a concern about overburdening the Animal Review Group. From our discussions with the head of school, researchers, and senior academics, it was agreed that a two-stage process would be introduced. And over time, the principle that all animal research needs ethics review was embedded in the University Code of Practice. And a policy, the management and review of research and teaching activities involving animals, non-ASPA, was approved by both AWERB and RG-QAC. RG-QAC is the Research Governance and Quality Assurance Committee into which AWERB reports. And I was asked, as chair of ARG, that I would join RG Quack in order that AWERB had a reporting line into this committee and into the senior management at the university. I should state at this point that the ethics review of non-ASPA and animal-derived products is still work in progress. And I'm not convinced we are capturing 100% of the activities. And this links on to a question that Nairi raised about how do we ensure that. But I'm confident that there is a cultural change, it's gathering pace, and we do have some plans to enhance and extend moving forwards. In terms of ethics review at the university, as you would expect, we have a main AWERB committee that meets 4 times a year and conducts all of the expected business of the animal welfare and ethical review body. The applications review group, which I chair, is a subcommittee of AWERB and is responsible for reviewing new PPL applications, amendments to PPLs, and the non-ASPA projects where applicable. It meets on an ad hoc basis as and when PPL applications or other applications are coming forwards. And the primary scope of the review groups is research and teaching in the schools of life sciences, psychology, and the Brighton and Sussex Medical School. The pre-application is a process for a quick review of proposed projects, and it's performed by the NBS and NACWO for the university. This review is really to see whether there is a more detailed submission that should go to the wider audience of ARG. It's intended to minimise the time and resource taken to review relatively low-risk projects and studies. This pre-application can also approve procedures that may form part of a wider project. And once approved, the project per se may not need approving, assuming that all the protocols proposed are already approved. What I mean by this is, again, within the EBE, we have a number of projects, many of them pertaining to surveys of animal populations, etc. So if you have approved protocols within that overall project, we felt there is no need to do a full ethical review on the project because they are all essentially the same. Where projects are approved, AWERB is made aware and will see sight of the applications excuse me, at the quarterly meetings. If the NBS and NACWO feel that a wide review is required, a full submission will then be submitted to the ARG. So to give you an example of the project or a project that would go through a pre-application, we reviewed a project which is about nature cameras and garden birds, their efficacy for viable census data and increasing connection to nature. This project was basically, as you can probably tell from the title, an observational project, and it was looking at our personal observation, citizen-based bird census projects, e.g. BTO's Garden Birdwatch, accurately estimating garden abundance and diversity. Or are homemade cameras a viable alternative method for estimating garden abundance and diversity? And do they allow citizens to connect to nature in the same way? Effectively, it was reviewing data for one group using cameras and one group personal observations. In terms of the form that gets submitted, as you can see, we want to know the start date and duration, a brief summary of the project, and then general information. So this project was a research project, it was field-based, it was in the UK, birds, humans were involved, there were no specific licenses or permissions, and the activities on this one were observation and behavioural. So for each of the projects, for each species, there will be a tick box which will tell us what they intend to do with respect to the various species. As this study didn't appear to have any particular ethics or welfare issues, it was approved by the MBS and NACRO. And we did have a similar project, which was cameras evaluating population of animals around schools. For the full applications, this would be considered by the Animal Review Group. And I would say that this is a much more formal application, focusing more on harm benefit analysis, animal welfare, funding in place, etc. And what we tried to do with this is take some of the questions from the project license application and put them into our non-ASPA approval process. So this was a broad project, again within EBE, regarding ongoing ecological field work. The project was looking into the effects of artificial light at night, noise pollution and habitat fragmentation associated with the transport network to facilitate the reduction of conservation impacts. We needed to check that the grant awarding body status of this project was funded by wildlife trusts and researcher startup funds. We asked what the relevant guidelines, if any, apply, and in this occasion it was the guidelines were from the Association for the Study of Animal Behaviour. And the harm benefit analysis, so when we looked into this project or this sequence of projects, the work is really designed to inform planning measures of infrastructure projects with a view to less disruption impact on various species, and to ensure that UK authorities execute their statutory duties with respect to protecting the various study species. The species and number of animals, this project covered a multitude of animals, so rodents, insectivores, bats, birds and invertebrates. And the sample sizes were minimised by using power analyses. In terms of the 3 Rs, again, we similar to a project licence application, we want to assess how the 3 Rs are being taken into account for these projects. And with this project, because of the type of the project, because we wanted to survey animal populations, obviously non-animal alternatives were not possible. But we did use advanced statistical and spatial modelling to negate the need for exhaustive field sampling. For reduction, the optimal sample sizes and where we were needing to take licensed or where the procedures were licensed but not covered by ASPA, then the sample sizes were agreed with the relevant authorities, so e.g. Natural England. And the refinements, wherever possible, procedures such as non or minimally invasive techniques were preferred. The location of the research, just going down the questions that are on the form, was in the UK. And if the project is in the wild, impact on the social group. For this project, there was a potential that the use of non-selective trapping may result in capturing non-target species, but the techniques employed were designed to reduce that particular aspect. And the other thing was that with the short-term removal of individuals, it was felt that there was no impact on other group members. There was not perceived to be a case where animals would be likely to be removed from the wild. The procedures across all of the species related to small mammal trapping, ringing, collection of breeding data, all which could be licensed, but again, not covered by ASPA. And then some of the non-licensed procedures would be video recording, camera trapping, thermal imaging, and invertebrate sampling. Within the application, it was felt that any of the physiological and behavioural effects would be short-term and the stresses would be transitory. And then we also asked for the supervisor statements of support in terms of the project. we have struggled a little bit with the ethics review in terms of we're reviewing the project from an ethical aspect, but how involved should we get in terms of, is it an acceptable project for the particular student or the level of qualification that they're studying. So they are the two main processes that we have. And I think we, after this webinar, I can look to share the forms that we use to capture the information that we need to be able to do an assessment of the ethics and any welfare considerations. To give you an idea of the challenges that we have, these are some of the projects that we've looked at in the last 2 years while we've been refining our non-ASPA reviews. So you can see we go from the herring gull in a project down at Brighton Pier to empathy and connectedness between domestic animals and the social communicative behaviours with studies relating to cats and dogs. Most of these are predominantly observational, although some have scenarios introduced into studies, for example, the cat work where they faced with unsolvable tasks and how they interact with humans, etc. I want to come back to examining bird colour vision throughout colour-space behavioural study, because I feel this demonstrates an example where our processes have had a positive impact on animal welfare in another country. Originally, the study examining bird colour vision throughout colour space was going to be performed in the UK and at Sussex University. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19, travel restrictions meant that the researcher could not travel to the UK. So it was decided that the work would be performed in Australia with researchers and senior academics at the University of Sussex performing the overview and offering advice. When the study was going to be performed in the UK, we have had several discussions within the university with the Home Office Inspector to confirm that it was a non-regulated study due to the study design. When we saw sight of the application from the institution in Australia, we immediately noticed that the enclosure sizes proposed as part of the study were below the UK Code of Practice. So we felt duty bound to report back that whilst obviously we agreed with the majority of the study because we'd already reviewed it with a view to it being performed in the UK, we asked for them to review the enclosure sizes, which they did, and the enclosures were increased to the UK Code of Practice. So I feel this is an example where we have been successful. We've taken a study, we've reviewed it, we fed back, and as I say, it was one performed in a different country. In terms of animal-derived products or materials, Catherine had mentioned the working group, which I am a member of, or I've recently joined, and where we are with animal-derived products and materials in the UK is that we have managed to collate a list of animal-derived products from life sciences psychology at the Brighton and Sussex Medical School. Predominantly, the nature of these materials, so for anatomy, as you can imagine, it's predominantly hearts, heads, brains, intestinal tracts obtained from abattoirs. For the animal tissue slides from an education supplier, defibrinated horse blood and other blood products from TCS, lamprey and dogfish for dissections from bait supplies, and insect specimens from metabugs. when we developed the list, again, this list has gone to both AWERB and RGQuack, so they are aware of the types of materials that we're using with. I've then approached a couple of the suppliers to see if we can get any statements or policies from them regarding their use of animal, anything to do with the humane treatments of animals, etc. And as an example of what I've received back, this is a couple of the supplier statements. And I think it links into something that Nikki mentioned about how abattoirs, etc., are governed. So with this one, this is specimens that actually come from the US through a company in the UK. And you can see that the majority of them are byproducts of either the food industry or in some cases where, unfortunately, cats and dogs are being euthanized from regulated humane shelters. My feeling about this statement is that it was quite hastily put together upon my request. And I think the view from the working group that Catherine has discussed is that where we would like to be is that all suppliers have a statement that is on their website. The second statement received similar lines, and this is from a local abattoir in the UK, a local supplier, but all of the samples are byproducts of the food industry, and no animals have been specifically slaughtered for these samples. I guess the question is how happy we are with these statements and potentially whether we should in some way audit some of these suppliers. The future refinements that I see within the university, and again, it links to some of the questions that have been asked previously, is how do we ensure that all activities are captured and therefore ethically reviewed? It is very difficult. I believe it is easier in industry. I think academia is very difficult because of the complexity, the size, and some of the processes that are in place. We have discussed whether we can link it to grant funding processes. When I joined the university, some of the costing for grants was not in the most formal or structured manner, and we have made successes there. So that in my position, I will see any grants that have anything to do with animals, and it's whether we link that to some of the processes. We've also discussed both internally and within Catherine's working group whether we can use procurement systems to highlight where researchers may be looking to purchase animal-derived materials and products. And the other key thing that I think we need to do at the university is that we need to have a process in place where we are regularly reviewing non-ASPA related projects. So at the moment, we're in a position where I would suggest that we're reviewing 85–90% of non-ASPA that we're made aware of. So there's probably 10% we need to see sight of. But we need to get different groups to then bring the reviews of these projects back to, in the first instance, ARG, I would suggest, and then to AWERB, so that we can see the number of projects, we can see the outputs, we can see any refinements that have been made, we can see whether any of them have had any issues. And I suppose my thinking is this is like the midterm review or the retrospective review on project licenses that we already have in place. So I hope that that's given you some idea of how we do the ethics review of non-regulated studies and protocols within the university, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Andrew, thank you very much. That was fascinating. We've already had a number of questions. How engaged are researchers with generally ethical considerations for non-ASPA research? Asked the anonymous question. Are they interested in sort of actively considering changes to their research practices, or do they mainly see it as unnecessary bureaucracy?
I think that they see it as, well, initially I think they saw it as unnecessary bureaucracy. If I go back to the study that was performed in Australia, there was a question of why do we need to review that if it's being done in a different country? And obviously from our point of view at the university, wherever the work is being performed, we want to ensure the highest standards, that the work is, that we have considered the ethics and so on. So I think, to be fair to, and very honest about that, the response to that question, I think the engagement is variable. I think some absolutely get it and understand why it's required, and others do see that it is a bit of a burden to them. But I think through the support of the heads of school, we've recently have a new Pro-Vice Chancellor for Research who's taken on the establishment licence. So I think, as I said in the presentation, change is happening. We just need to keep the pressure on.
Thank you. I think, to be honest, what you've just described, and both that question and your answer could apply to ethical reviews process for, any aspect of the research process. Ethics can often, in my view, mistakenly be seen as an impediment or a layer of bureaucracy rather than a facilitative process to help researchers do the best research that they can do.
And sorry, James. I think the other thing where where we've had to expand it a bit further is that where we're doing non-ASPA on animals that are also covered by ASPA, because the feeling is then that if it's not regulated by the Home Office, do we need to have the same standards?
Yeah.
And my stand on that, and the university stand, is absolutely, it's if we're housing non-ASPA studies, we should conform to the code of practice as an absolute minimum.
Thank you. Okay, Jenny asks, do you review all invertebrate studies, and what level of organism do you include?
So again, interesting question. I mean, we have some non-ASPA snail work, for example, which hasn't currently come through AWORD, that's ongoing, but the next batch we want to push to go through. The intention is that we will, anything relating to animals, invertebrates, etc., is that we will review. We haven't, in response to Jenny's question, we haven't kind of put a level on it at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Neri asks, when you do the reviews, how do you assess outputs? Can you or do you review the teaching material work? Again,
Nari, not at this stage. I think I mentioned in the presentation that it's trying to look at, say, some of the student projects, and is it our place to quantify the outputs of that particular project for the students, or are we looking at the ethical aspects and the animal welfare aspects? The reviews we would intend, like any ethical review, that it really has to be prior to the project starting. It's very difficult to do it retrospectively.
Okay, thank you. Okay, a few more questions. How do you manage the ethical review of large numbers of MSc research projects that can involve invertebrates? So obviously there's a volume question here.
Again, we would put those initially through the pre-application, and where there is a similarity in the protocols, we wouldn't assess every project. So if within the project there are a number of protocols or manipulations or procedures, we approve those And once they're approved, if a project then has 6 of those in it, then the project almost is approved anyway.
I see, brilliant. Okay, a few more questions. I mean, how do you, at Sussex, how do you make researchers aware that they need to submit their non-ASPA projects for ethical review? How do you raise awareness in this area?
So we've done that through the heads of school. For them to cascade, we also have the information on the website in terms of ethical review. So we have if you like, the ASPA, the AWERB process, and then links to how we should do projects that aren't covered by ASPA. But again, you know, being totally open and transparent, are we capturing everything? No, we're not currently.
Thank you. And does the animal unit itself get involved in training students or researchers who are involved in non-ASPA animal use?
If it's something where we have the skills, then we would. In EBE, so in the evolution behavioural, then they would have better qualified staff and individuals than I would have. But the expectation is that similar to ASPA work is that individuals working in the field will be trained by the relevant people.
Sure. Another question about your animal unit. Does your university allow the use of animals or animal-derived material on site, but outside of the animal unit itself?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, and a question from Jenny. How can we change the view that ethical review is unnecessary bureaucracy and get buy-in for ethics and culture of care?
It's a great question. If anyone knows the answer, then I think we all have. You know, I think we have to, you know, have our procedures and policies in place, and it is unfortunately just chipping away all the time. You know, it's trying to explain the benefits. You know, obviously a lot of this there is a potential for reputational risk. You know, if you're not following it. I mean, we've talked about some of the activities. You know, as we've been going through the if you like, the non-ASPA, as it's broadly called. You know, we were asked to review, for example, something that the student union had arranged for some dogs to have these cameras put on, and then to do a dog's view of campus. And the question then comes back: is that an ethical thing to do to a dog? I mean, a lot of us would say that, you know, it's a little camera, but some people could see that it's not the right way to do things. And I think it's, you know, where do we draw the line in terms of, you know, from a reputational point of view, somebody could come back and say, you know, the University of Sussex are condoning the mistreatment of animals by wearing these dogs where the camera is. So I think you know, I think it's very difficult. It's a great question, Jenny, and I don't think I have the answer completely, but I think it is just, you know, and obviously Adrian, I can see, has put something about improving culture of care. I think that's what we have to keep chipping away at.
Yes, thank you, Adrian. I'll put your very helpful comment into the chat stream so everyone, it's preserved, because things in the Q&A stream do vanish after a while. I think also, Jenny, to have my own, now I'm not an expert in this field, all my background's completely different discipline, archaeology, but questions about the value of ethical review and the perception of it, and indeed rules, whether regulatory in nature or from research organisations or professional bodies about how to conduct your research, are often seen as impediments and or unnecessary bureaucracy. So I think there is a broader cultural issue within the research community itself. I think it's partly tied into the pressures that researchers of all fields find themselves under, because we're time poor, resource poor, often feel we're under great pressure to publish the right results in the right type of journal and do so at some speed, the so-called publish or perish culture. So I think there's it's a wide-ranging problem, not limited to animal subject research, and I think there needs to be a cultural shift perhaps within the research communities as a whole. The good news is that many powerful organizations, funding agencies, publishers and others are focusing on sort of research culture as an issue and looking at how cultural change can perhaps improve buy-in for greater engagement with ethics, seeing it as a more facilitative process and less as a burdensome one. And for those of you who fancy watching a recorded session, we did a webinar in December on research culture with some very interesting speakers, and the presentations are up on our website. I think the videos will be up there soon. Okay, so yes, Adrian, thank you very much for those resources. I'll put them into the main chat stream. We have, let me have a look, just a couple more questions coming through. Okay, as a community, how can we put pressure on suppliers of animals in research to be more transparent?
Is this for animal-derived materials?
Quite possibly. I'm afraid the question didn't go into any more details. Sorry, this is yes, they did. Yes,
yeah. I mean, again, and Catherine, I hope I'm not misquoting, but I think the intention of the working group is that as a sector, we could put pressure on suppliers. So, you know, can we get to the point where we would only purchase from suppliers who are prepared to put statements, as you would expect from any research organisation, up on their websites? So effectively, you wouldn't, you know, it would be a pressure from industry, from academia, that we will only buy animal-derived products from suppliers that actually have a statement about their commitment to animal welfare and the humane treatment of animals.
Thank you, that's very helpful.